Chapter 25. It took Kayla a day to walk to the base of Whiteface Mountain. August had given her a trail map, and it helped her negotiate her way through the thick underbrush and shrubs. She had to make her way along the shore of a wide, shimmering lake before she could begin to climb. In places, the path disappeared altogether, but the map helped her estimate where she would be in relation to the lake. After a while, she veered away from the lake and came out to the meadow in a more obvious path. Her long walk north with Mufumbi had strengthened her endurance, and her feet had grown tough and accustomed to walking. She still needed to stop every few miles to regain her strength, and she paused and leaned against a boulder as she looked at the dirt trail ahead of her. It was surrounded on either side by tall grass dotted with flowers. The sun warmed her cheeks. Closing her eyes, she listened to the hum of insects. Having been spun out of the world she knew, she'd landed in a different world. In this world, she was the one living creature among many living things, not the one kind of creature in an environment of steel and glass. Here in the woods, she'd come to feel more at one with her space than she'd ever felt in her old life. There was energy in the trees, the earth, and even in the boulder she leaned on. She was aware of it these days as never before. Even when she lived in the cabin with Mufumbi, she hadn't been open to this feeling like she was now. Feeling re-energized, she continued on along the dirt trail through the meadow until it once again led her into the dense pine forest. The weather had grown warmer, but the coolness emanated from the thick carpet of pine needles on the forest floor and still caused a chill. August had located a poncho for her, and she took it from her pack and put it on. As she hiked, she thought of Mufumbi. Was he still in jail? They couldn't keep him long, just for stealing a box of Adlavenon. But had his parents come for him and taken him home? Could they force him to get tattooed? If he was able to, she knew he'd come back and ask around for Utona, knowing that Kayla would try to locate her. They'd agreed to meet in Lake Placid, but now it was too risky. Would he remember what Utona had said about the white face? Would August be able to find him in Lake Placid? She had no doubt that if there was any way possible, Mufumbi would try to get to her. If he didn't, she would have to go find him. Before this, she had never known it was possible to have this kind of closeness with another person. What an unexpected gift to have received in the middle of all of this misery. August had told her that once she started to hike the mountain, it would only take 2 or 3 hours to reach the tree line. That was where the trees grew scrubby and mostly stopped growing. From that point on, there would be only boulders to climb. After 2 hours, the forest was still thick, with no sign that she would soon come above the tree line. Here and there, orange-pink light filtered through the trees, but for the most part, the forest had become deeply shadowed. Just ahead of her, someone moved in the trail, and her heart raced with hopeful anticipation. "Mufumbi," she called. He waved with a wide sweep of his arm, and she ran towards him, but as she neared the figure, she skidded to a stop. It was Ezekiel, and this time, he was no vision. "Kayla," he called, coming towards her, "I finally found you." He was the last person she wanted to see. He'd come to bring her back to Tattoo Jen. Why else would he be here? She bolted into the woods, running as fast as she was able in the increasing darkness. He raced right behind her, closing the gap quickly. Crashing through the underbrush, he leapt and caught her shoulder, pulling her to the ground with him as he fell. Kayla kicked at him, struggling. "Get off me!" He threw himself on top of her, using his weight to pin her. "Stop! I've been looking for you ever since I arrived in Lake Placid. You never showed, so I asked around for Utona, figuring you'd head here. Someone finally told me. I should have known all along. The white face." "I should never have told you," she said. "Listen to me. I never lied to you. I said I wasn't sure who could live without the barcode. I admitted my doubts all along." She turned to face her face from him. "You were spying for Tattoo Jen all along. Only towards the end, I wanted to convince you all to get coded for your own sakes. You were ruining your lives. Why couldn't you be honest with me? You were so against the barcode, so stubborn about it, I thought you'd be upset that you dumped me." "I don't believe you," he jeered. "You and Nedra wanted to be big shots with Tattoo Jen. That's all there ever was to it. You tricked me and you used me because you thought I was naive and would believe anything you said. Let me sit up. Only if you promise not to run. It's taken me too long to find you," he said, lifting himself off her. Slowly she sat up, eyeing him wearily. These resistors have the wrong idea, Kayla, he said, sitting beside her. Don't waste your time with them. They can't win. It's better than being a slave to Global One, she cried heatedly. How is it better, he argued. Do you really want to be a prisoner of these mountains, unable to leave, forced to rough it in the woods? You're an artist, Kayla. What are you going to do up here in the forest with the rest of your life? Live, Kayla shouted, like a person, not a robot, like a free person. No, you won't, he insisted. You'll rot up here. Come back with me. Get the tattoo. With the tattoo, you can paint and sell your work. You don't have to go to art school for that. The barcode can't take away your creativity. He made it sound so sane, so reasonable. He stroked her hair. Your beautiful hair. What did you do to it? It doesn't matter. Everything can be all right, Kayla. I won't let you go this time. Ezekiel was still so handsome, so hard to resist. But he wasn't Mufumbi. He wasn't someone who would stand up for a principle, even if it wasn't in his own best interest. He wasn't Mufumbi, who would never desert her, who would do anything for her. He wasn't the person she loved from the deepest place in her heart. You don't believe any of what you're saying, she said. You're not being sensible. You've just given up. Ezekiel, a woman hurrying up the path carrying a bright flashlight. Kayla turned sharply towards the sound of her voice. It was Nedra. You're with her? Kayla whispered sharply, and everything came back in a cascade of bitter feeling. He'd lied to her about all of it, about Nedra, about the barcode. He'd betrayed them all, and he was doing it again. Nothing about you has changed. You're still a liar like you always were. Ezekiel, where are you? Nedra called in the dark. I think I found her. She left footprints. I don't care about her, Ezekiel whispered urgently. Now that I've found you again, I only want... Kayla wouldn't listen anymore. The two of them had come here to bring her back. Was there a reward for her return? Ezekiel, Nedra called again, louder this time, and he looked up towards her, and Kayla shot to her feet and bolted past him up the path. Kayla, he shouted, jumping up and running after her. She ran wildly, darting off the path. She paid no attention to direction as she scrambled over fallen trees and splashed through streams until her heart felt like it might explode. Finally, she slowed to a jog to regain her breath and slow her heart. Several yards behind her, the beam of Ezekiel's flashlight careened off the trees as he searched for her in the dim light. She stood panting, not daring to move for fear of attracting attention. This was a contest of wills, and she couldn't afford to lose. There was no way that she'd let him take her back, and she would never be Nedra's captive. Several feet ahead, she heard some creature hurry away. Turning towards the sound, she saw a small cave. She crouched low and moved stealthily to the mouth of the cave, and with a quick check over her shoulder, she wiggled inside, laying flat. She knew her feet would probably have been visible in the daylight, but there was not enough room to bend her knees and pull them inside. She was grateful now for the dark, and that she had never been claustrophobic. The cave smelled of mossy earth and the musky odor of whatever animal had inhabited it last. Dirt fell from the cave wall, and she shut her eyes and spit out what fell in her mouth. Reopening her eyes, she peered down the length of her body and out the cave opening. Ezekiel moved around outside. He had stopped, and from his jerky moments, she could tell he was checking frantically for her in all directions. After about 5 minutes, Nedra joined him. You let her get away, she accused him, her face demonic in the swept light. No, I swear, she just disappeared. Keep looking. If I bring her in and get her tattooed, you'll definitely give me the council chief spot. It'll be good for you, too. He nodded, and together they hurried off into the woods, still searching. Kayla hoped that the cave was not inhabited. She didn't want to risk leaving right away, knowing Nedra and Ezekiel were nearby. She listened to the crickets chirp, along with the buzz of other insects. Lightning bugs flashed in the dark outside the cave, and an owl hooted. The muscles of her calves ached and her feet throbbed. The threat of imminent danger, the adrenaline charge, was soon overcome by exhaustion, and she slept. In the middle of the night, she was abruptly awakened. She sat up, smacking her head on the upper rocks of the cave. A man's hand was wrapping around her ankle, and he had begun to pull her out of the cave. No, she shouted, clutching at the dirt and the rocks at the side of the cave to no avail. She found herself lying at the feet of a very tall man. It wasn't Ezekiel or Mufumbi. She could see that much by the large shape of his silhouette. He shined a flashlight beam on her face, blinding her. Yes, that's her, a female voice spoke from behind him.